They want to reduce the risk of what we call, very scientific term, crap identical twin at interview, displaying all the right attributes, saying all the right things, looking the part. And the twin that they unfortunately can end up with seems a very different person. They might look the same, sound the same, but they're actually behaving in a very different way. Just think when you lose someone, the business disruption, the time, the management effort, the opportunity cost, where people over-rely on rapport, can be fearful of awkward conversations for fear of offending. But we are the world leaders at being ashamed of being in the sales role when you look at the country averages. The ones who invest properly in their people get the best results. They're just getting out there. They're creating more opportunities.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sales Cadence podcast. My name is Matt Sykes. I'm your host. Joining the pair of us on today's episode is Dominic Waters from Paul Waters Associates. Dom is quite a unique individual in so much as he can see into the future. Let me just set the scene for you if you don't mind. Imagine the situation where you go to the marketplace to hire a new business development manager. You get a bunch of CVs in, you sift through them, and you get yourself down to the final two. You bring those two in for a final interview, and there's nothing to split the difference between the two of them. Both look great, sound great, CVs are off the charts, they handle themselves fantastically in a final interview. Both of these people you would put in front of your clients in a heartbeat. But you've got to pick one. And how'd you pick them? And if you're anything like I used to be in the past, it normally came down to one thing called gut feel. The problem with gut feel, of course, is sometimes we don't get it right. You hire somebody who isn't quite the same person that you thought they were. And this is the challenge that we all face when we go and hire salespeople. It's okay when things are going well. It's what happens when things aren't going well. How do you work out whether the person you're about to hire will have the mental resilience and the behavioral characteristics to be able to push through the challenging moments and come out the other side? Because that's what it takes to be a successful business development manager. And what Dom's product does is exactly that. It's a psychometric test. It evaluates the individual and it tells you as the sales leader, as the hirer, exactly what this person is likely to do when things don't go well. And take it from me, folks, and I must just apologise because it's a bit of a fanboy episode for me. I'm so supportive of what Dom does in the marketplace. I'll help anybody get a voice if their product or service saves people money and helps candidates from making the wrong choice of joining the wrong company. And that's exactly what Dom's product does. So I apologise in advance for sounding a little bit like I'm on the payroll, but I'm not. There is no affiliation with my business or Dom's at all. I just really have got a lot of time for people like him. So I hope you get as much from the episode as I certainly did. And without further ado, let me introduce you to Dominic Waters. Dom Waters, welcome to the Sales Cadence podcast.
Thanks very much for having me.
So excited to hear how this conversation goes, because what we're going to talk about on the episode today, Dom and myself, is some really, really valuable support for anybody who's in the sales industry, be that a sales leader, somebody who's in the hiring function, or somebody who's actually a candidate who's actually going for a job. Dom, do you remember what you were doing when you made your very first sale?
Do you know I do? A friend and I at school, we put together our own little odd job business. Our first sale was actually feeding a blind cat, a deaf cat. That was a deaf cat for 3 weeks. We were sort of, I don't know what we would have been, about 10 or 11.
Brilliant.
But we the thrill of running our own business and designing our leaflets and getting some money in was great.
Were you always that kind of guy? But did you, right the way through your earlier years and then, into your first role in paid employment, did you always harbour that kind of entrepreneurial spirit?
I guess so. I worked throughout my school holidays. I was lucky. I was very privileged. I went to, a very privileged school, but I was made aware of the value of things. And so I worked all my holidays and my uni, and it's a work ethic I try, now with children, try to instill, because you have to go out there and earn it yourself, don't you?
100% you do. And so I'll just keep you there in those earlier years just for one more question. And it's I would guess at some point feeding deaf cats and cutting hedges probably wasn't your idea of what you want to do for a living, but you will have at some point in your educational years been sat in a careers advice lesson. Do you remember back in the day when you were a teenager, was there anything that you actually wanted to be when you grew up?
Yeah, I do. I remember not knowing, but I remember that quite clearly, because again, with the school it was, there was a very sort of defined route into the city and all those sort of institutions. And it wasn't something I was remotely interested in. But the sales side of things, I guess, must have been clicking away in the background there. And it ended up being I started when I graduated, a graduate on the graduate scheme with the RAC, as in not the Shakespeare company, the car breakdown company, but working for all their divisions, all except the core division of breakdown, actually. So vehicle inspections, in insurance,
Okay.
bits and bobs. Eventually ended up in a sales role, selling vehicle inspection services to garages so they could promote it on their cars. This car has been RAC inspected and protected. And I then moved on to another sales job with a big brewery, Scottish in Newcastle at the time, Courage Beer, if you remember that, Matt,
Yeah, I
back
do.
in the day.
Yeah.
And yeah, so my sales route was there, and then I got involved in the family business.
So bring the listeners up to speed, if you would, Dom. Just sort of give us that background to, what is it that you do right now?
Paul Waters Associates is the family business I mentioned. Paul is my father. He had been running the company as a sales training consultancy. He has a sales background himself. Since the early 80s, I think 1981, he started the business when he came out of corporate life and wanted to captain his own ship. And he was traditionally, throughout the 80s, he was doing bespoke skills training for various UK businesses, Boots, Massey Ferguson, the tractor makers, Raleigh, the bike people, Bass, the brewers. And he was doing some work for British Airways in the early 90s with their corporate sales teams. And it was then that he found out about this SPQ Gold test assessment that we've become so heavily involved in since 1994. And what he was hearing from the other airlines, or what British Airways were hearing from their Star Alliance partners who were using SPQ, was that it really shed some light, both from a hiring perspective, but also from an ongoing development perspective, as to why some people they can have the capability, you can give them the tools, you can help them refine those tools, but actually it can be difficult to get them day in, day out to undertake sales activity. And so that's where it all began. Paul checked it out on British Airways' behalf and was that impressed with it, having gone out to the States to meet the originators, Behavioural Sciences Research Press, and also spend time, of course, with other people who were using SPQ. He was very conscious of not coming back and selling BA a pup. But, he was convinced enough that it would work well for them, but also he wanted an involvement. And it was lying dormant as a license in the UK. And so he picked that up, and we've been representing them ever since. I joined him in 1997. And I took over the business in 2003. And that's what we still do today: support existing teams, sales teams, and also a lot of businesses with their sales hiring using the SPQ Gold test.
What is SPQ Gold?
Well, it's probably easier to tell you what it isn't. What it isn't is a measurement of anybody's skill, knowledge, capability. Importantly, it's not a measure of their personality. The reason it's so useful and so effective is that it puts all those factors to one side and concentrates on the area that can often be the gap between whether somebody has that knowledge, skill, experience, intelligence to do a sales job and someone who will actually do it day in, day out on a consistent basis. And in order to do that, it focuses on the habit level behaviors that people can have around initiating contact, maintaining contact, doing all the what you could call sales in a very broad sense, but basically anything that involves proactively creating opportunities.
We'll call that selling.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people don't like the word sales and try to avoid it. We come across a lot of teams, especially back in the early parts of the century now, when we were working with a lot of the banks. None of them, you couldn't get anyone there to admit that they were in sales. They're all targeted and they're all
of course,
measured on revenue. But yes, it's sales, isn't it? It's proactively generating opportunities.
It is, and we hear this all the time on various different podcasts, read it in books, read about it on posts on LinkedIn, that there's a kind of a widely accepted belief that people don't seek out a role in the sales industry, they fall into one. I'm okay with that. There are instances of people who actually sought one out. I'm one of those people, believe it or not. But in most cases, I think it's fair to say that it's an unregulated industry. If you've got a pulse and you come across quite well, you can pass most of the reasonably low bar tests there are to get into the industry. I think what I heard there is this provides an organisation, an individual with the ability to say, this looks like a good CV. She seems like a very good person because she came across well in the interview. Let's really go and find out. Is that really how best to explain it?
Yeah, exactly that. It's regardless of on paper potential and ability, whether somebody actually has the requisite resilience, commitment, and comfort about selling day in, day out. And as you say, Matt, sales is a very overlooked profession, I would say. It's the second oldest profession in the world, and a lot would say that the oldest involves sales.
Well, if you think about it, actually, it is the oldest, because in order to get the first one, you've got to sell it, right?
Yeah, that's very true. So yeah, let's agree on that. It's the oldest profession in the world, but certainly, things are changing. I have a university age son, or soon to be, and we're taking a very different option, or we're helping him with a very different option in terms of his career, higher education, than is the traditional route of just going to uni and getting a degree in something completely irrelevant to something that you would need to want to pursue a sales career.
Right. Yeah.
You think about, if you want to become a doctor, you do medicine. If you want to become a lawyer, you do law. If you want to become sales, it's an underrated profession. It is a skill and vocation in itself, as you
100%. And
trying to fight, Matt.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm a scholar of the subject. A very busy day today. It's coming up to 4:00 in the afternoon when we're recording this. I've been out all day long, 2 client meetings, and in between those journeys in my car, listening, because I'm just that kind of guy that wants to understand and learn more. And there is absolutely a trend. Here we are in 2024, Dom, and the trend is moving more and more towards buyer safety and further away from those traditional old school and even new school sales techniques, because there's some really brilliant sales training providers out there at the moment. I'm going to class myself as one of those. But the bias tends to be more about making sure that you do what you're employed to do, or in my case, in order to put food on my table, which is to go and close a deal. And there's a happy marriage, I think, somewhere between those two worlds, which is I need to make a sale, but I absolutely need to make sure that the buyer is the most important person in the conversation. And this is where sometimes sales can fall over, because as we both kind of pointed out in the last few moments, you can come into the profession, you can go through some training. Yes, of course, you apply that training, and if you get some good training, then you can really do quite well. But the fundamental principle of SPQ Gold in your product, Dom, is kind of that doesn't really matter so much. What matters is what's driving the behavior. And so therefore, this is fundamentally a psychology-based tool. It's about what's going on up here that's allowing, for example, if things aren't going quite so well, how will this person behave?
Yeah, we're all our actions are generally defined by our habit level behaviours, aren't they? And That's essentially what this test measures in a narrow environment, i.e. sales environment. Of course, people display certain attributes that the assessment picks up, for example, around whether somebody might be quite difficult and argumentative during their in that sales remit. Then the chances are they may well behave like that outside work. But it is a very specific, narrow band, but very deep assessment that really helps organizations to understand, and the individual themselves, what it is that could potentially be holding them back from just cracking on with it. Skills, of course, that's where you, Matt, that's where you come in. We're certainly not discounting people's capability. In fact, do you know, the analogy I use all the time is, it's getting a bit old now, but it's the X Factor analogy. You know, the test doesn't measure the quality of somebody's voice, how that their skill, if you like, their capability. What it does measure, though, is how willing that person is to go out and find an audience to sing to.
Right.
And so, you know, the argument is you want somebody with the voice, but there's no point having the voice if they're not going to go out and sing to anyone. Likewise, there's no point us profiling somebody who might be absolutely fearless about sales activity, but might have a terrible voice and be doing it in completely the wrong way.
And so let's put the building blocks in place for the listener then. So as we describe this, first and foremost, it's an exercise that someone will go through. Just want to try and build up the picture in the listener's ears of, okay, what is this thing? Who is the person that's really reaching out to you initially and saying, I'd like some help, please? Who is your ideal client?
The majority of our use in the UK, Matt, is for organisations who are hiring. They want to reduce the risk of what we call, a very scientific term, crap identical twin, where they have somebody who is at interview displaying all the right attributes, saying all the right things, looking the part, and the twin that they unfortunately can end up with, who a few weeks down the line seems a very different person. They might look the same, sound the same, but they're actually behaving in a very different way. That's essentially the main use of SPQ, I would say. We do a lot of work with existing teams as well, organizations who want to understand what it is that's making their top performers consistently perform where others can't. We tend to avoid firefighting assessments where we just, profile the bottom performers, because I think that sends the wrong message. But usually we get our hands on the whole team, and you will see a massive variance in reports and in results. And invariably it correlates very strongly with their performance, because the people who are most successful in sales usually aren't 2 or 3 times more intelligent than anyone else, or have been doing it significantly longer than anyone else. They're just getting out there. They're creating more opportunities. They're more comfortable. They're more committed. They're more resilient. They feed more opportunities into the funnel. They get more coming out the other side.
That's really interesting. So predominantly it tends to be more about people who are hiring, but I think I really like that point there, where you've obviously got clients now that are so into this that they will periodically put the whole team through it. And that's not to go on a witch hunt, that's to learn, right? Because there's a whole boatload of learning that comes when you read what is essentially a very detailed report.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example of why it's always a constructive exercise. We recently profiled a team, and a couple of the stronger performers. I think one had been around for about 5 years, the other was a couple of years in. Good reports, but it came up that they're getting a bit specific, but there's a particular scale on the SPQ that picks up somebody's clarity around their personal goals, or basically what they want to get out of a sales job.
Yeah.
And they were both not where you would expect them to be on that scale. And the results were fed back to them, and both admitted that they were seeing a lack of future within that organization. And the company were able, that weren't aware of it, thought they were happy, performing well, getting paid very well for it. And the company were able to jump on that very quickly and give them that clarity that there was a future and there was a good future for them, thus preventing two good performers leaving, and the collateral damage and the literal damage cost wise and in other areas that would have come with that. So that's a perfect example.
Crikey. I mean, the return on investment for that is huge, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's immeasurable. It really
Yeah.
is. And it's the same at the front end with hiring people. I have a client in a recruitment business in Birmingham who recruit into the financial services sector. They ran. I had the conversation. It's fresh in my mind. A couple of weeks ago with their CEO, and he told me that they've been using SPQ for the past year. They were referred to it or to us, and they had run, I think it was 92 or 93 SPQ Gold tests, and that had cost them, it had cost them around £11,000-12,000 to run that. But in terms of what they calculated to be the cost of a bad hire the year before, they saved over £400,000 in bad hires, and it's a very difficult thing to measure. But just think when you lose someone, the business disruption, the time, the management effort, the opportunity cost of somebody who comes in and doesn't perform as well. It can be huge. And
I mean, the ripples are far-reaching, aren't they? It's
yeah.
it's also the impact that has on the rest of the team that are remaining. Right, when they see someone leave, there's also it is immeasurable. You're absolutely right.
And externally as well, the disruption and the reputational damage that if you're constantly talking to a new person as a customer or a client. But Matt, I know I'm preaching to the converted, but
You are.
I work with currently over 200 businesses, some large, some small. I tend to really enjoy working. My sweet spot is with owner-run businesses because you can get stuff done quickly. Having worked with the big banks and telecoms companies back in the day, I don't miss that, if I'm honest. But what I've seen apply across, in the 25 plus years I've been involved, what I've seen apply across all size organisations is that the ones who invest properly in their people get the best results, and the ones who make shortcuts in terms of spending money on their people get bitten, and it ends up costing them way more than what they perceive they've saved.
So, having recently, I think I took it about a month or so ago, maybe 2 months ago. So the process is very straightforward. You send me a link, and I'm into effectively the SPQ software. And what am I presented with? How does that? What happens next?
Yeah, so if you were applying to an organisation, the link would probably still come from us saying, we're sending you this on the organisation's behalf. It's part of their process. Please, could you do this? We'll perhaps set you a deadline, give you a bit of grounding, bit of background information, and basically some guidance on how to approach the questionnaire. So it's all very clearly described. Yes, you log on to behavioural sciences system. It's an online psychometric test. That's what it is. So I'm sort of always keen to slightly avoid the word psychometric because people tend to think of personality tests when they think of psychometrics, and it certainly isn't a personality test. And yeah, it's SPQ stands for Sales Preference Questionnaire. It takes roughly an hour. You are asked lots of questions around how you feel in certain sales situations. And once you hit submit, the results come back to us via the system. But the key is every report we send out in the UK is always accompanied by contextualized, manually written interpretation. And that's absolutely vital. We try to provide levels of detail because some people by necessity and some by want only want the top line. Others really want to get into the real nitty gritty of the report and the individual scales. And we need to be able to cater for both ends of that scale. But yes, in summary terms, and this is how we present the information in overall terms in our interpretation, there are what we call the Holy Trinity. There are essentially three rev counters, graphical rev counters on the report that summarize pretty much everything. And in order of importance, they're actually, if you look at them, it's best to look at them as a sports podium. The one in the middle is the top step, the one on the right is the second step, the one on the left is the third. But they're all very important. But the top step,
visually, it's like looking at a speedo, isn't it, on a car?
It is.
Speedometer.
It is, yeah. It's a speedo that hasn't got any scores on it, but it has just got it is out of 100, but it's got a red section, a green section, and a yellow section. And you want to be in the green. You don't particularly want to be in the yellow. You definitely don't want to be in the red. And the needles show you exactly where you score. The most important scale, the top step of the podium is the energy and resilience you are currently likely to bring to the sales part of the job. Okay, so that's absolutely key. And what we often see at interview, especially, are people who seem very enthusiastic, full of energy, ready to really hit the ground and be very successful in the role. And they're like fireworks, Matt. You know, they fade, they fade very quickly. So that's not what we are measuring. You know, we're measuring underlying resilience day in, day out, week in, week out, when things begin to get tough at times, when you're not feeling well on a Monday morning, or you're not really feeling into it on a Friday afternoon. Are you going to get your head down and carry on, or are you just going to think,
This report is effectively measuring selling.
Yes.
And well, let's caveat that and say, so if you can think of the classic, you're hiring a business development person whose fundamental role is to create opportunities, progress those opportunities, and close them. It's their motivation, as you just explained there, Dom. Everything's going well, I'm good. When things aren't going so well, how do I perform? And that's what the report is giving, effectively, the future feedback to the person that's receiving or reading that report.
Yeah. Resilience is becoming a slightly trendy word, perhaps too trendy at the moment, but it's core. And what we also find a lot is that companies assume that because somebody is enthusiastic and competitive about something outside what they would need to be doing in the role, they've played high level sports, for example, is a classic case. That automatically means that they're going to translate that resilience into a sales role. Two completely different things. I love watching rugby, and I would put a lot of effort into going to see it. Not so much with golf, completely different. And that's, it's no different. People have enthusiasm and resilience around certain aspects in life, and don't in others. So it's
if you think about it in real context, there's imagine asking, and I'm sure people do, and funny enough, I was listening to a podcast on this very subject this morning. Imagine asking a question in an interview to somebody you're interested in hiring. When it gets really, really crap, tell me what score out of 100 you would give yourself in terms of your ability to be resilient, to push through and come out the other side and continue to add value to the role that you're in. Over to you with the answer. A great question to ask. It would be interesting to know how many responses you get back were true. What this is doing is giving you effectively the true response.
It is, yeah.
Or as close as it can get, right?
Because at the surface level, everybody can tell you. I can tell you how I'm going to lose a stone and all the good habits I'm going to display. But whether I'm actually going to do them is a very different matter. So yeah, exactly that. And people are so well briefed, especially in interview. In hiring situations, people are so well briefed and often believe, people who haven't sold before. That's just another aspect. It's often not that they're trying to pull the wool over your eyes. They genuinely believe, it sounds great, I'm up for it. And it's, it's only once they're in the job and costing organisations money and failing.
Yeah, and it's really interesting as well because there aren't that many. We are one, and I know of one other. There aren't that many organisations in the marketplace that train sales resilience, based on what we've touched on briefly, and I'm sure we'll come on to and again as we think about the next generation of salespeople coming through. This resilience thing, or rather the sales thing, isn't going to get easier, it's going to get harder. And we're probably moving a little bit further away from those people skills of empathy, which are fundamental to sales, and curiosity, because there's a lot of things that we now rely on to do the work for us. And so it's only obvious to me that this first thing that we've come across, or the first, the number one, if you like, on the tripod, or the first most important dial, which is about motivation, is such a crucial one.
It is. And having said that, the second area we measure is pretty close. And it's the one actually we're seeing the most change in a negative way over the past certainly 3 years. And that's, you're measuring it, somebody's energy and resilience. But we also measure, it's important to split it out, we also measure somebody's likely commitment to the role as well. And what you sometimes find is that somebody's got the resilience and the energy to do a job, but their heart's not really in it.
Yeah.
They've got the tank is full, but they've got nowhere to drive to. And what we are seeing, this particular this area that we measure, this clarity and commitment, i.e. how likely somebody is to tie all those personal goals that no doubt they articulate to you as a manager or to you as a potential employer, how they're actually tying those into the goals that you want them to achieve and that they should be achieving in the job. And we've seen a drop in that score. The higher the better on that scale. And I think it's a lot to do with COVID. I think it's a lot to do with Gen Z, with the risk of sounding old and miserable. But there's definitely a much less of a career outlook in people. And, as an employer, I want to give myself the best chance of getting somebody into a role where they'll enjoy it, they'll be successful, and they'll want to stick around. And a lot of people you are going to be pushing water uphill with.
And it's such a shame as well, because we've already alluded to it being, the oldest skill or the oldest profession out there. It's actually the closest thing I've ever come to for life skills, because sales skills and life skills are, in my world, almost exactly the same thing. You don't need to be a salesperson to be very, very interested in the ability to be able to communicate. You don't need to be in sales to have a very strong ability to be empathetic towards someone and understand them. And if you're able to do those two things, then you have a really good chance of being able to positively influence them in ways that work best for them. And when you tie all those things together, we don't need to be talking about a salesperson. We can be talking about a school teacher. Absolutely. Or we can be talking about a bank manager. And so, it's interesting, isn't it? And I'm sure, in years to come, we'll be laughing and saying, we got it wrong about that. Life skills are even more fundamental than they ever were. That AI thing went away completely. Although I suspect that's probably not the case. Let me briefly just interrupt this episode and just say to you, where are you going on your holiday this year? Hey? Are you doing the pool holiday, the beach holiday? Have you got your book yet? Absolute shameless plug on my part. 2 books. Converted, How to Help More People Buy What You Sell. It is a 10-step book to allow you to take a lead to a close. You will love that by the pool. Sales Glue is a second book that I produced, and that's going to give you the insights in what it takes to be psychologically at the top of your game and help more people buy from you as well. So 2 books for your summer holiday: Converted, How to Help More People Buy What You Sell, and Sales Glue. Shameless plug over. Now back to the episode. Back to the report. So you've described 2. You said there were 3.
Yeah, the third dial is the one that splits down into many, many different areas. So let's say, for sake of argument, you've got somebody who has got a good level of resilience. Their heart's in the job. They want to. They know what they want to achieve from the job. Their personal targets are tied in with their work targets, so that's all good. Then we look at that third dial, and what that picks up is actually, when it comes to that constant, consistent initiating, maintaining contact, whether it's face-to-face, on the phone, via email, doesn't matter, whether they, in a sales capacity, they have any discomfort around that area that either leads them to behave differently because nerves get in the way, or avoid, either sometimes or in some cases we see all the time. And to give you an example of that, well, let me just give you a bit of history first. When behavioural sciences were first looking at this area, by the way, when they started, going back to what you were saying earlier, Matt, it was all just watching how people interact socially with each other. It was a study that had nothing to do with sales. And if you think about it, that's all sales is. It's effectively interacting, advocating yourself, advocating your position. and obviously in sales case, your products and services. And what they found very early on when the focus went down into looking at salespeople, because they were commissioned by a big organization to do so, was that just saying people had a fear of sales or a fear of rejection was too broad brush in terms of a description. They could see when they were observing these people and their sales activities, they could see them backing away in certain situations. For some, it was standing up in front of a group of people. That was their fear. For others, it was asking for referrals. They felt very uncomfortable and to avoid that. For others, it was dealing with senior level people, either company seniority or whether they were high net worth individuals or whether they were highly educated people who they felt a bit intimidated by. So what they were able to do was separate out lots of different types, all independent from one another, of sales discomforts that people can have. Now that third dial is an overall weighted summary of the person's scores across all those areas. And it is weighted because some things like fear of the phone carry a very high weighting for obvious reasons, because they're so important. But yes, all those scales are individually listed and scored on the SPQ report.
Is there the opportunity just to pick out one or two of those individual metrics? You mentioned there fear of the phone. That's one of them, right?
Yep, telephobia. I mean, it does what it says on the tin, or it measures what it says on the tin. Yeah, telephobia, and it's an interesting scale. As a recovering telephobic myself, I completely understand it. You know, it's not my favourite form of contact. Sometimes, if I'm not in the mood, it's a struggle for me to get on with my call list, and that's why the motivation and the commitment is so important. That's why those two other dials are so critical, because it pushes you sometimes to do stuff you don't want to do and to overcome that discomfort. But yeah, telephobia, we are seeing that score steadily rise, as in the higher the score, the bad score. It's a phobia. And therefore, and again, you know, I'm trying to apply some anecdotal experience of it. You know, I've got children who do everything on the phone but speak on it.
Yeah, it's weird that, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you know,
but it's a sign of the times, though.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Yeah, they've got great methods of doing it, but the phone is still a very important form of contact in pretty much every sales job. You know, I work with some very forward-looking businesses who are really headlong into using automation where possible, but even they accept and understand that phone contact and a human talking to a human at some point in the process, and usually it's a vital point, is absolutely critical. And avoiding that or replacing it with a bunging someone an email or a WhatsApp message or whatever other form of contact often does result in not getting the business.
You and I have spoken about this a couple of times, and I just want you to share this with the listener about the one area which effectively gives the receiver of this information an insight into whether or not the individual will be willing to accept coaching, training, advice in those critical moments when things aren't perhaps going so well. Which one is that one?
Yes, there's an interesting scale. It's a bit of a mouthful, Matt. You will know this one. It's called oppositional reflex. What it picks up is whether somebody, often regardless of performance, you know, they could actually be a good performer, but whether they are reflexively quite difficult and challenging. So if you say, I suggest method A, they'll fold their arms to you reflexively and go, no, methods B is better. But if you'd said method B, it would have, you know, method A would have been better for them. So
why is that so important when it comes to selling?
Well, we measure it for two reasons. First of all, because externally, you can rub potential clients and candidates up the wrong way. Of course you can. You know, you can, a lot of people often aren't aware that they're doing it. It's a subconscious thing. And that can turn people off when they're spiky and a bit difficult. But of course, unlike some of the other behaviors, it can also be damaging internally in terms of somebody, you know, taking up a disproportionate amount of a manager's time compared to the rest of the team, being disruptive in that team dynamic. I'm sure a few people perhaps listening to this podcast, Matt, can probably place a few faces on this.
One or two coming to mind.
the oppositional scale, it's a key one we look at because um, it's damaging internally, as we're talking about, and externally. Some of the other scales are there are a few key ones we always, well, we watch them all, but the ones we really watch out for. There's another one that I'm sure you can picture some people who demonstrate this behaviour in a sales role. Almost the opposite, actually. A thing called yielder, where people over rely on rapport, can be fearful of awkward conversations for fear of offending, and it can render people toothless in a sales role. What it doesn't, if somebody's like you are an oppositional, somebody's zero on a yielder score, i.e. a perfect score, that doesn't mean that they're going to go and smash doors down and be aggressive, over the top salespeople. But what it does mean is that they're perfectly comfortable when the opportunity is there to ask, to expand a conversation, to overcome an objection, not to back down on the deal, the fee, the margin, whatever it is. They won't hesitate. Whereas other people spend a lot of time and effort building rapport, but don't get anything over the line.
Again, back to that point I made earlier, the trend in the industry, in the sales training industry, is to, we've been through Spin, we've been through Challenger. We are very much in the world of buyer safety. And buyer safety is getting to that position where, you are putting them front and center and making sure that they make the right decision, even if that means the decision goes somewhere else and not with you. And actually, that actually plays to yielder. And so we've got to be really careful that we aren't actually falling into this trap of, almost not winning enough business. The other one that I thought was, just briefly looking at this report in the short time that we've got left, was, and you probably bundle it all together under one heading, but it's that characteristic where you aren't completely comfortable that you're in the sales industry. And that can have all sorts of consequential impacts when, for example, you are trying to close a deal, you are in an objections handling scenario, and if you aren't completely comfortable that you are at ease being in the profession that you're in, you may not necessarily follow all the way through and get this deal over the line because you just don't want to appear as a salesperson. Is that how did I interpret that correctly?
Absolutely. It's a scale called role rejection. Again, that's what it says on the tin. And it's interesting, just a couple of things on that area, just to expand on that, Matt. We are the world leaders in the UK. This is used all over the world, this assessment, along with Singapore. Interestingly, they're a close second to us. But we are the world leaders at being ashamed of being in the sales role when you look at the country averages. And
Wow.
it's something that drives me daft, if I'm honest, because you think of yourself when you're in a position, when you're a customer or a client to any product or service. You and that other party know why you're both there. You want to get on with it. You don't want somebody trying to pretend that they're not something that they are. A deal needs to be done. It's not about being, again, that's where the skills that you teach come into it, Matt, of doing it properly. But yes, we see a lot of people and organizations, it's a cultural thing, apologizing and for people being in sales roles and trying to disguise it. Again, go into lots of organizations, people who are the salespeople, they're targeted, that it's clearly what they do. You won't see the word sales anywhere in their titles. They think that's to placate the customer and put forward a favourable impression, but I think all it does is confuse and in some cases annoy, actually.
Yeah.
It sends the wrong message, in my view.
You mentioned there about forward-thinking businesses that you're working with. Could you just give me a sort of brief summary of how a forward-thinking business would use this?
Just based on my experience of working with businesses and seeing the ones who get the best results in general terms, is to maximise, within reason, the time and effort they put into selecting people in the first place for sales roles. And then once they're in there, when it moves into your world, Matt, properly supporting them. But yes, as part of the hiring process, the most organisations would use this a fair way down the process at the point that they'd established that the person can put one foot in front of the other, and on paper seems to be a good cultural, a good team fit, all that sort of stuff that can be a bit misleading, a bit superficial, but you do need to establish some kind of measurement there. And then what they do is they use the SPQ at the stage, usually prior to either a penultimate interview or a final interview, where the findings, and this is a key thing that we haven't discussed, what the report not only produces is it's not just the scales themselves and our advice on what those scales mean, but also questions from either a management development point of view with existing people, but also in interview situations where you can explore those specific areas that have come up for the person. Say it's telephobia, say it's goal level, say it's yielder, say it's oppositional reflex. There are specific questions to ask around those areas and what to look out for in the way that they answer. So you can really start bringing this to life. And then, organizations that we haven't been working with for a while, and their people wouldn't have been SPQ'd, the existing people prior to coming in, we tend to get stuck into their teams, and it can really help you understand why some people are struggling, the core reasons, as opposed to the symptoms. You might get two people who you would perceive to be struggling for the same reasons. You SPQ them, and you see actually that the fundamental issue is very different for one person than it is to the other, and then you can tackle that specifically. So it's like anything, isn't it? I see businesses spend a fortune on their systems. They never seem to hold back on spending money on tech. I would always argue your people are way more important than that, and not enough time and effort gets put into understanding what makes them tick.
Dom, it's been a really fascinating conversation. I hope the listeners don't think there's been a bit of a love-in for SPQ, but it's been very, very difficult for me to not do anything other than just wax lyrical about it, because I've used it, as I said, in my past experiences as a sales leader, as a sales director when I've hired. And again, as I said recently, I've been through the test myself, and it is absolutely spot on in all the right areas. So that's the reason really I wanted to get you on the show and bring you to the listeners' attention. Where can people find you, Dom?
They can find me online, Dominic Waters, on LinkedIn. You will find me with SPQ next to me pretty easily. Our website is pwauk.co.uk, and I'm always happy to have a chat. And by the way, I do a few networks we work with. I do customer clinics around hiring and everything. I'm happy to have a chat about anything. Bear in mind, this is not my product. I'm also, as you might expect, I am an SPQ fanboy, but there's a reason why, as a family, we've been involved with these guys for as long as we have, and we're 100% committed to them. I am often approached by other providers of testing instruments because of the work that I do, and I'm 100% loyal to these guys because I've seen it work time and time again, and because I see that it's measuring an area that matters. Measurement is important, but I see a lot of things measuring areas that don't actually matter for the for the topic in hand. This one is laser focused on salespeople. We don't tend to cater to individuals. There is information on the site. If you want to understand more, my advice, and we've got links on the site, would be to go to Behavioural Sciences Research Press and look at their research that's written more for the individual. And there is a couple of books that have been published by Dudley and Goodson on the matter. We tend to approach it from a business to business perspective. And, anybody, I work with 1-2 person businesses who are, making that critical hire, looking to grow. I work with, organizations who, have a team of 10 who they're wanting to get more out of. There's no one I'm not happy to talk to have a chat with. Hopefully I might be able to help you with SPQ, but certainly more than happy to have a chat.
Dom, thank you ever so much for taking the time today to share that wonderful insight. And I really look forward to seeing what happens next for your business. Sounds like you're keeping it within the family by the sounds of things. If you'll pardon the phrase.
I would like us to have a third generation, Matt.
That would be amazing, wouldn't it?
It might be a few years away, but no, I would love to. And thank you very much for inviting me on. I am honoured to be on your podcast. I appreciate you taking the time to have me on as well. So thank you very much, Matt.
Terrific. And I'll put all of the information that Dom mentioned there in the show notes. So if I were you, I'd be heading there in the next, 2 or 3 minutes when this podcast ends. Dom Waters, thank you ever so much for joining me on the Sales Cadence podcast.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure.
Always enjoy conversations of this nature, especially when they are geared up to helping people save money and make the right decisions, certainly when it comes to employment. There is nothing more costly or disruptive to getting it wrong when it comes to recruitment. So I hope you got as much from that episode as I certainly did. You know the mantra on this show by now, folks. Everybody's in sales, we're all selling something. Whatever it is that you are selling, if things are going great, fantastic, go and do more. If things aren't going the way you want, hey, look, get in touch. Sales Cadence, sales training and coaching. Go to the website, salescadence.co.uk, take the sales audit, and who knows, you and I might jump on a call and have a conversation about helping you get even better than you are. Thanks for listening, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode of the Sales Cadence podcast.